Now, in the notes, I said that we're going to introduce ourselves. I don't know what I meant by that.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too.
Honestly, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of explaining who we are and the reason for being of the podcast.
The one who sounds like he's got a blocked nose is me.
Do I sound like I have a blocked nose? All right. So do you guys want to start this thing?
Somehow.
Okay.
Where do we start?
Well, we'll start with me basically introducing our listeners to this podcast and who we are and sort of the reason for being for it. So my name's Josh Ramirez. I'm joined this very, very early morning, at least in my neck of the woods, by John Morrison and James Schell. And this is the premiere episode of Low Volume, a podcast run by the people who run Small Form Factor Network and Small Form Factor Forum. And the reason for being, for lack of a better way to put it, is there aren't many podcasts out there, there aren't many websites out there that really talk about technology as it pertains to small form factor systems, which we define as systems that are under 19 liters or so in volume. So, of course, we have our news site, which you can look for a link on our website. We also have the forum, which has been running for some time now. We have a community of people there who are very much focused on small form factor systems, but we figured that doing a podcast would be a sort of a fun way to offer a venue for us to sort of just talk shop and see what's going on in the industry as it pertains to that particular form factor. So, obviously, the topic for this show, we started at the top of 2016, and what happens at the top of 2016 or any given year, CES, the multi-day conference. Now, of course, we were following and reading all of the updates from all sorts of websites, and I know I have a few that I always check into, Non-Tech, The Verge, so on and so forth. But one of the things we discovered while reading stories in preparation for this initial podcast was the fact that, my goodness, practically nobody actually reports on any of this stuff as it pertains to small form factors at all. I mean, they might talk about a particular component that has a form factor that makes sense for smaller systems, but they won't really talk about it much beyond, ASUS announced this thing, and you'll be able to buy it, but we don't know the price or when it's available. Like the level of analysis is almost completely useless.
Yeah, but it's the same for everything announced at CES. Like, we don't know when it's going to come to market.
Yeah, the price and availability is... Well, I think that's more on the manufacturer's end. Is just they never have pricing or availability at CES. It's always coming soon, coming 2016 or something like that.
Yeah, and I get the feeling that a lot of it's just attributable to the fact that they feel like they have to announce something at CES. And so even if there's something that's not quite fully baked and they just genuinely don't know this stuff, they're like, okay, well, give us a prototype, we'll make it look pretty so we can show it at CES and announce it.
Basically.
But now you don't even know. I mean, I recall last year there were a few products that people were like semi-interested in, and they were announced at CES. They haven't been made or sold since, but they were announced at CES. So,
yep, like the Sandia cooler, haven't heard a peep out of them since CES last year. Just nothing, not a status update, no news.
Any update this year at CES or?
Nope. I don't know. They just disappeared.
That's disappointing.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if they ran into problems or if it's just not ready yet. But, yeah, it's just nothing.
Well, let's talk about some of the stuff that was actually announced at CES. I know that looking at our notes for the show today, one of the things that really surprised me was the quantity of SFX power supplies we saw from multiple manufacturers. We actually ran a story on SFF Network. James typed it out. He had noticed on one of the Facebook updates that Silverstone had posted that an image of a lineup of all of their small form factor power supplies, and there were a few units at the forefront of that image that didn't match any of the existing products in their catalog and seemed to be unannounced units. And in fact, later in the day, Silverstone did confirm that they were new units that they were adding to the collection that they already have, which is pretty large, at least compared to the rest of the industry.
It's really strange because they came out of nowhere is what I find odd. Because Tony, who's Silverstone's I forget his official title, but he's basically like I think a product manager, and he's kind of the one that interacts with us on the forum, or well, not on SFF forum, but on some of the other forums I see him, and he's kind of teased other power supplies before that hasn't been officially announced, but he's made no mention of these things, which is really strange.
Yeah.
And then they just kind of popped out of nowhere. Yeah, so it's just really weird to just see them all of a sudden at CES. Unfortunately, none of the other news sites really took a real hard look at them, so we don't have a ton of detail. But yeah, there's going to be a 500 and 650 watt versions. So these are SFX, so that'd be 100 millimeter long. The really interesting thing about them that I find is that they cram a 92 millimeter fan in them. Because the SX600G, which was their previous flagship SFX unit, only has an 80 millimeter fan, and I think it's partly the fault of the fan, and then partly just the simplistic fan controllers that it's fairly loud, both at idle and at load. So I'm really curious to see how these will perform as far as noise with a larger fan, and hopefully they'll have a fancier fan controller. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of detail. Like, really all we know, it's 500, 600, there's a 500 watt unit, a 650 watt unit. It's got a 92 millimeter fan. The OEM is Enhance, which is the same, it's the same company that's the OEM for the 600 watt. And, somebody on, Reddit, the SFFPC subreddit had, called Silverstone, and supposedly these things will be coming out around May, though. I mean, he probably just got a hold of just like the normal PR guys, so I'm not sure how much solid info they really have on the actual.
We'll see how
date.
accurate that turns out to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, these are really interesting, if only because of the fan and nothing else. I mean, the 500 and 650 watt for power delivery, that's all well and good, especially the 650 watt, just because that's a decent amount of power to be able to deliver from SFX versus SFX-L, and I believe both of them have 2x 8-pin output, right?
Yes, though I'm not sure. Well, they do in the pictures, but I don't think that's accurate because like the SX600G and the SX500LG, which would be the 600 watt SFX and the 500 watt SFX-L, they both come with because they both have a single 8-pin connector on the PSU side, and they come with a cable that's from an 8-pin on the PSU side to two 6+2s on the other end of the cable. Okay. So on the 650, having two connectors on the PSU side is perfect because you'll be able to run SLI like I am off the 600 watt without having to use splitters.
Right.
But that doesn't make sense on the 500 watt because theoretically having four 8-pin connectors, I mean, that's really too much for a 500 watt.
Yes.
So kind of my guess is that, because they've done this before, I think when they were first showing off the 600 watt version, some of the early appearances of it were just the 450 watt version, or the ST45SF-G with a new sticker. So they've done this before where like the unit wasn't ready, so they just took another one and just put the other sticker on it. So my guess is maybe the 500 watt unit that was at CES it's actually the 650 with the 500 watt sticker, because it just doesn't really make sense for it to have two connectors on the PSU side.
I bet you're right.
Yeah, I really think it just doesn't make sense, because it's like you wouldn't need that many connectors off 500 watts.
No, you wouldn't. I mean, I'm trying to come up with a half decent reason, but it's just not coming to me.
Yeah, so that's my guess. We'll see. I'd be curious if that's what it turns out to be.
I'm wondering if they rushed these to market like last minute just to try and compete with what Corsair was coming out with.
Yeah, and that was the other interesting thing about this too. So I believe Corsair announced, what was it? Two power supplies. There's like a 600 watt version and a 450 watt version.
Yes, it's the SF600 and
Yeah.
SF450.
Right, and those have 92 mil fans as well, which was nice to see. And then I don't know much beyond that. I was just to me it was interesting because I think the running joke inside the small form factor community is that like Corsair is like the anti SFF company. I mean, they'll make a case that's nearly 40 liters in size and then brag about how small it is.
Yep.
So obviously they have the Bulldog, and maybe there's some sort of increased interest on their side of things about this form factor, but I certainly had not expected that they were going to announce much of anything on that front. So for them to arrive with not one but two different power supplies that look, at least on the outset, looked pretty interesting, was nice to see. As well as the fact that I believe they're delivering these by late February, so we'll actually be able to get our hands on them relatively soon.
Well, maybe. So basically, what's happening is that because these were originally designed for Bulldog. And, of course, they're just releasing them by themselves for people using other cases. And what's happened is that, like we talk about it in the news article, but I think it was Syndicate had a video about the Bulldog and the power supplies. And the story, I guess, that they got from Corsair is that the power supplies were delayed because, like a lot of the kind of top tier power supply companies, it's good marketing to have all Japanese capacitors. It's just the Japanese capacitors are kind of have a reputation for better quality, but a lot of times, because with manufacturing nowadays, it's not always so clear where stuff is actually made anymore. Like you may be dealing with a company who makes the bulk of their products in one country, but they may have one or two lines that, for whatever reason, whether they just don't have the equipment or it was too expensive for them to do it, they outsource it to maybe a subsidiary or just another company entirely somewhere else. So my guess is that they had spec'd one of the capacitors in these new power supplies, probably something like unusual, probably because for space constraints would be my guess, and that in the end it turned out that particular capacitor that they had picked was not made in Japan. So there went their marketing. So they ended up having to special order a batch of this particular capacitor made in Japan. And so that's kind of what the delay on the power supply was. And so what's happened is that the first batch of the power supplies are all being dedicated to Bulldog, since Bulldog is going to come with these. And since Bulldog's been pushed back a little bit, it's pushed back the power supplies as well. And so I think I've heard 3 different dates so far. I think from CES, and then somebody contacted Corsair, and then I think somebody on the Corsair forums has posted dates, and it keeps getting pushed back. So I think the current date's late February, but it may be later than that at this rate. But yeah, it's an interesting unit. Like my favorite part is like the 92 millimeter fan's nice, but the modular connectors on these, because on the Silverstone and most everybody else's units, and they're kind of like normal modular power supplies. They stick out a fair bit, but on the Corsairs, they're not completely flush, but they're mostly flush with the face of the casing, so that kind of just saves you even more space, which is really nice.
And what is the pinout for those? Does it provide a number of 6+2 or 8-pin connectors, or?
So they have a the 24 pin is split, or it looks like. Or no, maybe I'm looking at the picture now on the site. Maybe that's wrong, but yeah,
it's split.
But yeah, for the 6-pin, there are 2, or for the PCI Express, there are 2 8-pin connectors on the PSU. Though I don't know what kind of cables it's going to come with, because on the Silverstone we know it's likely to come with a with the cable that has 2 6+2 connectors on the end of the cable.
Yep.
Because that's what their other units come with. But on the Corsair units, for a 600 watt unit, I would hope that it would come with same kind of cable, so you could run SLI if you wanted.
Yeah.
But I mean, since they don't really have a case that takes SFX that can run SLI, I'm not sure if they'll actually provide the cables to do so, at least out of the box anyway.
Mm-hmm. So the last thing, at least in terms of power supply news, and this actually isn't really news insofar that we've known that this product exists for a while now, also from Silverstone, is their 700 watt platinum rated SFX-L power supply, which I personally am actually really looking forward to because I'm hoping to use that particular unit in an upcoming build that I have planned. But I believe we've received clarification that that's now estimated to land sometime in March. Which is still a little ways off, but relatively soon, certainly soon enough for someone who's looking to buy parts closer to when we see new graphics and other things from NVIDIA et al. But just figured that was worth mentioning. That will be, for sure, the highest rated and probably best performing power supply of its class for some time once that actually arrives. And certainly for people that are going to be running multiple graphics cards inside their computer, that's highly, highly desirable.
Or someone running an FX CPU.
Ooh, burn.
Hey, I run one.
Yeah, you can make that joke.
I know the pain.
Please send all complaints to this guy over here.
I'm running it off a 300 watt at the moment. It's fine.
Are you really?
Yep.
Wow, that's impressive. Do you have do you have a discrete graphics card too, or?
Yep. R7
Oh
360.
my goodness.
Which
Wow,
is
you like to live dangerously, sir.
That's a 110 watt card. That leaves 280-ish, 180-ish watts for it. That's enough.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough.
It's fully rated at 12 volts and 300 watts, so I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, and I will say that it's a common mistake to highly overestimate how much power delivery you actually need from your power supply. So you're pushing it a little bit, but if you actually sum up here's the rated wattage for all these parts, I think you're going to basically be at 300 watts. So you're probably fine. You're probably okay.
I think I worked it out at 250 actually.
Oh really? Oh,
yeah.
So look at that. You're over 20% over the delivery you need.
It's not
well,
really
I
hot or
stand
anything,
corrected.
I like to live dangerously.
Just a little dangerously. All right, so I think that's all we've got for power supplies. But the other thing, at least from my perspective, that was really, really interesting was this article that John, you wrote, Intel's 5x5 making a comeback. So you were making comments earlier that this isn't actually something that's new so much as being revisited. But from the point of view of someone who's really interested in sort of smaller form factor systems and sort of pre-assembled stuff coming out from that realm, I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit on what Intel and I think ASRock was working on, was able to demonstrate at CES.
Yeah, at CES, ASRock and ECS, which was an interesting one, both previewed a couple of boards, along with Silverstone, who kind of previewed a case, which is of a rather interesting design. But the whole idea is it's somewhere between the Intel NUCs and the Mini-STX form factor. But I'm struggling to see a use for it, actually.
Yeah, so this is what I was going to ask you, because I mean, they're sort of cool in their own right. They're very, very compact, and that with the cases and other things that people provided, almost like barebones systems for this, they're interesting enough. I'm just struggling to come up with a reason for being. Why would I buy this compared to just bringing in parts together and having a case that's almost as small but would certainly be a lot more flexible.
Or going with something like an Intel NUC. If you're going to do a home theater PC, it's got...
Right.
At the lower end, it's got similar performance. It does enough for your usual home theater PC stuff. But if you want performance, you're going to want to pretty much go to Mini-STX. Because the only real capable graphics on the Intel socket at the moment is the Iris Pro's, was it HD 6200? And it's not on any of the cheaper CPUs.
It's not. I find the sentence, for performance you really need to go to ITX, to be hilarious. But no, I mean, as a strategic decision that Intel and then these companies would actually sort of buy in and spend a lot of engineering resources to provide products for it, I just find it super interesting because it does feel like there's already adequate coverage for this sort of use case in between the NUC and then ITX, dependent on whether or not your focus is really on like as small as possible and performance compromises are okay, or maybe not quite that small, but I want to be able to use basically any components of any given power that I want. I just, again, like, you know, for whatever reason, this year CES just was really surprising to me because you saw all of these initiatives or products or ideas from companies that no one was really asking for, but we got them.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that, and it's kind of confusing. It's like they don't know what they're doing. They're just trying to fill in our niche. But
yeah, or like, you know,
without
check some
asking us.
boxes and feel like they've addressed something. I just, yeah, I mean, again, like, it's interesting. Like, I like that there's a tension here. I just don't see I mean, certainly within my own life, I don't see the practical application of it. And then even when I just think of what's a generic use case for someone, for these systems, was it H110M STX, like, from ASRock. I mean, I just, like, who would I recommend this to? For what purpose? I don't... And they don't even seem to really have a good way of explaining that either. Like, most of the stuff I'm reading about them online is merely just focused on, like, oh, we're working with Intel, and it's an even smaller form factor, and that's great. And it's like, well, why? Why is it great?
Yeah, I've considered various use cases, like home theater PC, might as well go with a NUC. Businesses, thin client or a NUC, or a desktop PC that's actually got storage in it.
Right.
What else would there be? Industrial control machines, you don't really want this kind of system in it. You want it locked down and all embedded.
Yeah, and you'd probably want it sealed and or passively cooled anyway, which I didn't see for any of these. So.
Nope. The interesting thing is the ASRock has been is using the Intel stock cooler, which makes it far bigger than it really needs to be.
That is an interesting decision. They were like, we want to make it really, really small, but we don't want to spend the extra $7
Yeah, I mean, at least,
to actually make it really, really small.
At least CCS went and demoed it with the Silverstone cooler. I can't remember the exact model number of that one, but it's significantly smaller. It's about the height of the push pins, if I remember rightly.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I'd actually like to see an AMD version of this using like one of their like powerful APUs.
Yes.
That would make sense because like on the Intel ones, like you don't get the really good graphics until you get to like some of the top tier stuff, and some of it's
like
just
i3,
really not
i5
available.
level. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like an APU, I think makes a lot more sense in this form factor, because then you're not really missing the PCI Express slot so much. But here, I mean, if you want the really top-end graphics, you're really kind of limited in which chips you can get. And then if you don't care about graphics performance, then, yeah, why not just get a NUC or something? So, yeah, it's just, really strange form factor. But, yeah, I'm hoping that now that it's kind of a standard, that AMD could just develop something maybe for Zen that kind of just fits this form factor.
That would be awesome.
The issue I see with that idea is the same with thin ITX. It was all Intel except for ECS, who launched a FM2 board for it. Never saw any on the market, but it's still on their website. There was only the one board from AMD sockets.
Well, ECS was one of the companies that had a product for this form factor. I don't think they had a case or anything else, but they had like an engineering sample for the 5x5 form factor.
They seem to do. ECS seems to like the small form factor stuff. They just never seem to do it quite right. As proven by the motherboard I just blew.
Yeah, oh no, that's right.
Rated for 125 watts? Nope.
Not ready.
Nope. I probably would have blown it with
but
a
no,
90 watt
I
fan.
agree, and I'm surprised I hadn't thought about it before. But yeah, this is ripe for really robust APU within that performance and price range. I wonder if this is something that AMD is thinking about, because I don't think we really saw a lot from their corner at least at CES this year. Probably mostly because most of the stuff that they're working on is either already announced or they just aren't ready to talk about it yet. But like, to me, that's probably one of the most exciting developments we'll get to see in 2016. So I'm really curious as to what that translates into, not only in terms of just sort of discrete products, like, okay, here are the APUs or CPUs, whatever we have on offer, but also in terms of like, okay, and that means we can provide or target these sorts of form factors, these sorts of use cases, especially in the context of an industry where like all the focus now seems to be on not only small form factor broadly, but like, you know, home theater PC, Steam machine, those sorts of things more specifically.
I'm actually really quite excited about the whole idea of AM4, the single platform for everything. Because right now
Yes.
we've got AM1, we've got FM2 Plus, and we've got AM3 Plus.
AM3 Plus, yeah.
And
And what is that? How does that division work? Like, I know I'm a bit more familiar on the Intel side of things, and really for Intel, it's more of a generational thing than anything. Yeah. But with AMD, it seems to sort of be a way for them to divide like classes of CPUs or classes of products.
AM1 is limited to 25 watt APUs. The fastest, I believe, is a 2.1 gigahertz quad core. FM2 and FM2 Plus is all the rest of the APUs. And AM3 Plus doesn't have integrated graphics on the actual processor, but you do get up to 8 cores. Whereas
so that
FM2 is limited to quad core.
Okay, fair enough. Now that you explain it like that, it's very easy.
Yeah. But it would be much nicer if it was one platform.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the one thing I've been missing is AM3 plus ITX.
And then this would all but guarantee it because, it's
Yeah.
a similar socket means anything could be plopped in there.
Pretty much. And with obviously going down to 14 nanometers on Zen and whatnot, it's going to definitely bring the power consumption down, which is a plus.
Yeah, and that combined with the robust work behind trying to have good integrated graphics, I'm super excited. I can't wait. So the other thing that happened at CES, and this sort of is a nice segue going from bare bones pre-built 5x5 systems. James wrote an article during CES talking about this new case, this glorified trash can from MSI called the Vortex. It's a ton of components, including a dual GPU setup within a form factor very similar to the Mac Pro, actually. I think the cooling solution for it's pretty similar as well, with sort of like a unified thermal core. It has all these components, and they fit it within, I think it's under six liters in volume, but in any case, James,
it's 6.5
6.5
liters.
Okay.
Yes.
And so I don't know actually too much about this, other than you can have up to like dual GTX 980s, and it had like a dual storage solution, and it's also incredibly expensive.
Yeah. So it's very similar to the Mac Pro in kind of its layout. So it's not like a perfectly cylindrical like the Mac Pro is, but it's very similar in kind of like shape and size. And the cooling solution is very similar as well. So you got like the Mac Pro, you got this single centrifugal fan at the top of the unit, and then it kind of pulls in air from the bottom and up through the unit through all the heat sinks and then out the top. Is how the cooling arrangement works. So it can take up to an Intel i7 6700K, 64 gigs of RAM. It's got dual M.2 slots, and these are PCI Express 3.0 X4 slots, and then dual GTX 980s. And basically the way they've done this is that the video cards are using the MXM format, which is typically what you would see on kind of like a high-end laptop. And I think in August or September, NVIDIA had released the 980s, not the 980M, but actual like full 980s in a MXM card. And so that's what they're using here for the top spec model, which is how they're able to do the 980 Sly on this thing. And it's like the Mac Pro, though. The Mac Pro is really cool because it's got that kind of single triangular heat sink, and then like on each face of the heat sink is like your two cards and then like the motherboard, whereas here it's still like a triangular format, but each GPU and the CPU has kind of its own separate heat sink, kind of like I guess what you would say, like I guess on the outside of the card, so between the cards or the motherboard and the casing is where the heat sink is. And then kind of like in the middle is the power supply, because actually they're using an internal power supply for this thing, which is really interesting that they managed. Not only is it 6.5 liters, they also fit the power supply inside of it, and yeah, it's a really just a lot of engineering went into this thing because it's just, I mean, getting a quad core processor and then SLI and just 6.5 liter cylinders, just crazy. But yeah, like on the article on the website, they had released a video kind of showing the it's kind of a hype video, just kind of exploded views and quick animations, so it's kind of hard to get a real feel for it. But the nice thing with the exploded views is if you kind of like pause it and look at it, you get a feel for like the internal layout, so we can kind of make out some details. Of course, I mean, this is still in development and it's just a kind of a rendered animation, so some of the details may not be finalized or accurate, but it looks fairly close comparing it to like the actual units that people were looking at CES. But yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, very proprietary, of course, custom motherboard, custom cooling, custom power supply.
The upgrade story for this doesn't look terribly promising.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because MSI, like, they were telling people that they're gonna allow for upgrades on this thing, which, I mean,
how?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like the panels are removable, so you don't have to like destroy it to get it apart. So I mean, that would be nice. But yeah, I mean, the MXM cards, I mean, I think it's more of like it's upgradable in theory, because we see this on some high-end laptops, is like they'll have, rather than having the GPU soldered to the main board, they'll have an MXM card. So in theory, you could replace it. But I mean, what I've seen in the past is that just the MXM cards that you can get to upgrade are just so expensive that it's just not worth it. So that's kind of what I suspect is going to happen here. But I mean, if you can upgrade like maybe your RAM and CPU, I guess that's cool. But yeah, it's the upgradability. I don't really know why they're touting that, because I don't really see it here.
I wonder if
go ahead.
Sorry. I wonder if they're more referring to upgradability as in configurable in the cart before you buy it.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't
that's
thought
a good
of that,
point.
but yeah, that would make sense.
That would be one way for them to get away with being able to use the word. But yeah, I don't see how anyone buying this should sort of fool themselves into thinking that this is something that they'll be able to part out and upgrade over the course of like a decade or something. It's just like, it's really interesting, the form factor and what they've been able to achieve by using these unusual parts or sort of proprietary way of assembling things is like really, really neat. But I think for customers and for people in industry, you really need to approach something like this from the position you would something like the Mac Pro, which is to say, like, it's really great for what it is, but it is what it is, and it's not going to be anything else you try and make it of. However you're going to part this out or order it or BTO, once it arrives at your doorstep, outside of like adding more memory or upgrading one of the SSDs down the line, like, you're really not going to be able to do much with it. Which is just the trade-off that you kind of have to accept in exchange for being able to get the volume down so damn much.
I mean, even looking at the exploded view of it, it just looks like a nightmare to upgrade.
They crammed a heck of a lot into it. I mean, this was not, kudos to MSI, because this was clearly quite the engineering challenge.
Oh, of course.
Do they have they announced availability for this? Is it like, can people pre-order now, or?
No, I think it's just like a 2016 type of thing. I haven't really heard any dates. Of course, kind of typical for CES, but I think it's not on the article. But I think Linus from Linus Tech Tips got some info from MSI that on pricing. I think it's because it's going to be available in different specs. So the 6700K with the dual 980s is kind of like the spec, like completely spec'd out version.
Yeah.
The flagship. Though I think AnonTech, I believe, said that it would be offered in up to dual 980 Ti's, but I think that may be like a typo or something, because the Ti's aren't available in MXM format. Yeah. So I'm not sure on that, where they got that from. But anyway, so the dual 980 Ti's will be $3,000. And with the dual 960s, and I'm not sure which CPU that is, it'd be $2,000.
Yikes. I mean, not surprising, but yeah. Like I said, you're paying for the form. You're paying for the fact that they got it all in this nice, pretty cylinder. Oof. I mean, I guess I'm just surprised because of the timing of this. Like, you know, so they announced at CES. We don't know when it's going to be available, but simply due to that fact, you can sort of intuit that, okay, well, there's going to be months of waiting before anyone's going to be able to get their hands on this thing. And, you know, this is the year where, you know, on the NVIDIA side, at least, we're going to see Pascal. We're going to see finally the move to, you know, improved process nodes, so smaller transistors. So at least in theory, better efficiency and power performance. And like all of those improvements that we can expect from graphics, from an architectural point of view, stand to really, really benefit a product literally exactly like this, like high performance, but you're really concerned about thermals because it's going to be in a very small enclosure and all of this. So just, I guess I was really, what was surprising the most to me about the Vortex, just sort of thinking about it after the fact, is that they even announced it at all. Like, if I were MSI, I would have seriously considered saying, maybe it's worthwhile to wait until we get these new parts from NVIDIA. We probably can, you know, skip the MXM format altogether and use just standard GPU parts for this. And, you know, from an engineering point of view, that will probably be a lot easier to integrate into this sort of a system. But they seem to really want to get this out the door now, or at least announce it. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. Like, I'm sort of worried that it won't do well because people won't buy it, because it's like, why would I buy this when, like, literally right around the corner is is, you know, dramatically improved hardware that's just architecturally very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that, it may be they're never even really going to sell it with the 900 series cards, and maybe that, like, by the time it comes out, whatever they're going to call the Pascal cards, they'll just plop it on an MXM card, drop it in, and it'll be ready to go. So, I don't know. It is rather strange timing, though. I mean, I guess the other thing, though, is that because, I mean, the 980s have been out for a while now, but the 980s in the MXM format have only been out since late last year. So as far as that goes, I mean, it hasn't been that long since, like, this has even been possible. So, but yeah, I don't know. It seems kind of odd. Like, if it was released today, that would make sense. Because, yeah, the MXM format, or for the 980s, hasn't been that long. But to announce it and then, I mean, if it comes out next month, maybe that's still okay. But if it doesn't come out till summer, then yeah, that'd be really weird.
Yeah. So the other sort of pre-built system that was announced and was at least notable during CES from Origin PC was the Kronos. And this one's a lot more traditional insofar that, I mean, it basically just looks like your standard sort of thin and tall desktop enclosure. It is quite small. In the promo imagery they have for it, they have one of their mice like leaning up against it, and you can get a really good sense of the scale. It's less than a foot tall, about 4 inches thick, and then I think like 14 inches deep or so. But you know, like it's the layout's fairly traditional. It's a ITX board, and they fold over to have the GPU sort of laying underneath it. It actually does support an optical drive, which I found moderately hilarious.
Why?
And you can fit in... Yeah, I know, right? An optical drive? It's 2016, dude.
Exactly.
Yeah. But beyond that, you know, like, I think up to 4 2.5-inch SSDs, as well as a full-size hard drive. I mean, it sort of checks all the boxes for what I think most people would expect for a pre-build of this nature. But it certainly looks interesting. I think this one will potentially work well for a lot of people, just as sort of your stand-in for a console replacement, you know, home theater PC or what have you. They certainly got the size down to a reasonable point where I could see a lot of people sort of putting this with all their other gear, AV gear, in the living room.
I think living room gaming and home theater PC usage is why they've included the optical drive, because I couldn't see any reason why otherwise.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and maybe this is just me living in my own bubble, but of all the people that I know that have gaming computers, or even just computers for day-to-day life. Like they either don't have optical drives, or they do, if only because it's just a holdover from all the previous systems they had that had optical drives, and they just couldn't think of a reason not to include it. But yeah, the use case for them is only becoming more and more limited. I don't even know people that have Blu-ray drives at this point. Like, it seems that technology was skipped entirely in exchange for, I'll just handle things digitally now. Like, why wouldn't I?
Well, I mean, like I believe the Blu-rays, the current standard for Blu-ray is not enough for 4K anyway. So, I mean, either you're going to have to upgrade yet again, or you could just stream it like people are already doing with like Netflix and whatnot. So, yeah, I definitely, I think partly on this one is, yeah, HTPC, whatever, but also I think there's just space for it. Because it's the case is basically they've made it wide enough in order to fit. Actually, it's kind of interesting. They have 3 expansion slots in this case, and I believe what it's for is so that they can use like something like a triple slot card like the Titan Z, which is NVIDIA's dual GPU, which I think the only reason they've really done that is I can't imagine they sell very many, but I think it's just the bragging rights of, look, we have a dual GPU in a little under 11 liters. Seems like the only reason to even bother, because I can't imagine that's much of a seller. But yeah, I mean, since they've made it wide enough to fit not just the 3 slots, but also a 3.5-inch drive underneath that. Though I'm not sure how well that works in practice with heat, but anyway.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you. Like, certainly from a layout perspective, that makes sense because it's just enough room for it. But I would be terrified if I had like a Titan Z, and then beneath that my hard drive, and then metal, and like it was just squeezed in between these 2 incredibly warm metallic surfaces. That just seems like a recipe for failure.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think they stick to like kind of the reference cards with the blowers, so it's not going to be as bad. And I believe what they've done is that because they have a slim all-in-one radiator, I think it's 120 millimeter for the CPU, and the way they've configured it is that it's exhausting. So I guess the idea is like if any heat's building up, like in that kind of the area between the video card and the drives, is that it would kind of pull that out. Just as it's cooling the processor. I guess that's the idea. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they've tested it, but I wouldn't be comfortable with it either. I mean, for the 2.5-inch, like for SSDs, I wouldn't be so worried. But yeah, like a 3.5-inch drive, especially if you have a kind of like a high performance, like a 7200 RPM one. I mean, it's going to be generating its own heat. Plus the video card, when it's operating, even if it's a blower design, I mean, the back plate or just the back of the card's just going to be radiating heat also.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's definitely going to heat up that kind of gap between them. And as I think the back panel of this case is solid, so there's not any venting on the other side of the hard drive. And then I don't know if this is the only configuration, but the one that they've showed off has a small window showing off the video card. And so there's a vent at the front of the window for it to pull in air to the video card's fan. But so for the most part, that panel is also not really vented much either. So there's really not a whole lot of ventilation in this thing.
Yeah,
So
I can't see any venting.
I'm not sure how well that's going to work out. But I mean, what it is though is like, since the case is thick enough to do that, to have the 3.5-inch drive and the 3 expansion slots. So you're going to be looking at least, so I mean that's about 85 millimeters right there, just for those 3 things.
Yeah.
For the slots and the hard drive, and then the power supply is only 63.5 millimeters tall. So there's kind of a gap there between the side panel and the power supply, and there's really nothing else to put there. So it kind of makes sense to just kind of stick an optical drive, and that way the people who want it can have it, and at least it's a slot loader. So if you don't want it, then it's not really that obtrusive on the exterior.
Yeah, I mean, overall it looks, I mean, it doesn't look great, but it looks fine. Like, it meets the design language of some of the other pre-builds they offer. And I mean, I'm picky, so I'll complain that like, oh, the vents are awkwardly placed and ugly, and the window makes no sense, and the bezel on the front is really plastically and dumb, and the I/O ports are colored, so that clashes with the design language, and the way they have all the exposed screws on the seams surrounding the front really doesn't look nice, and it's a little too
Yeah,
tall.
I'm not a
and
big fan of that. Yeah.
all of these minor points, but like overall, I mean, it's fine. It has like a LED light bar on the bottom, so I guess that kind of looks cool, maybe, but it's close enough. It's good enough for most purposes.
It's small though, which is kind of what I like, because like we didn't really talk about it on the site at all, but I think it was iBuyPower announced I think it was the Revolt, or the Revolt 2.
Is that seriously the name?
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
no.
and it's like 40 liters, and that's their like new small case. So, I mean, for its flaws, at least Origin here has a decently small case. So I'm really happy for that. I'm not a big fan of these like Mini-STX 40-liter things like the NZXT was showing off their crazy one, which we don't have it in the docs here, but if you go and look at pictures of it, it's just, at least the prototype they showed is just pretty crazy looking. It's got these bowed panels, which they're really proud of because of the difficulty of manufacturing them, because they're curved.
They've been doing that with cars for decades.
Yeah, but it looks crazy on a computer case. It's like somebody just like took a normal case and then like put some like gunpowder in it and then just blew it up. Except it didn't blow the panels off, so it's just dented in every direction. That's what it looks like.
It looks stuffed, like overstuffed or overinflated, which is exactly what you don't want a case that's ostensibly super small to look like. I mean, it makes no sense. It was an engineering marvel that doesn't sort of suit any particular purpose or need. Like, it looks cool. No one should ever buy this, but it looks cool.
They're overly proud of it. They even did a full sheet off reveal to all the media, but they didn't have the side window cut out. It was just blank steel. There's no other information on it.
I wish I was there.
Yeah, they like had because it has like a full side window, but they had it like blocked off so you couldn't see the interior. So yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that anything on the interior is even that special though, because I mean, what could you possibly do that's that exotic without? I mean, because we got some pictures of like the rear panel, and I mean it's a fairly typical. It's a Mini-STX board. There's 2 expansion slots, and then you have an ATX PSU underneath that.
They didn't even. It only has 2 expansion slots.
Yeah, there's 2 expansion slots.
Oh my lord.
Yeah.
I mean, like, okay, now you already know. Like, what possibly could they provide in the inside that's at all compelling? Like, if that's the volume and it's ITX and it's only got 2 expansion slots, like, already it's doomed. This is doomed as a product. There's nothing. There could be a portal to El Dorado could exist on the inside of this case, and it still would not be worth its weight. This is silly. This thing is stupid. Like, come on. And the worst part is, like, NZXT, like, they're just, like, from my perspective at least, I really enjoy their sort of design language and aesthetic appeal, and in general I like their products. Maybe not in the small form factor side of things, but like I think they usually do a pretty good job from a design point of view. And so the fact that they like come in and they're like, this is our answer to people's desire for small form factors is a marshmallow. Like, what is this?
Yeah,
this isn't what we wanted. Nobody asked for this.
Yeah, I think they saw the Prodigy. They saw the Corsair, so-called small form factor.
The 250D.
Yeah. The Case Labs Mini-STX thing, and thought, oh no, that must be small form factor. We'll just roll with that. Nope.
The worst part is you're probably right. That's probably the depth and level of thought they gave to this product. They're just like,
same goes for that Revolt case, which I have issues from. I have issues with that on a design level, but that's because I designed something similar about 5 years ago.
Oh really?
Yeah, but I managed to fit ATX in it.
That kind of says everything right there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, every single one of these so-called small form factor cases, you could fit ATX in it.
Right. I mean, that's the laughable part is like, now the fact that it's ITX is not like a benefit, it's a drawback because it's like there's no reason that you
Yeah.
had to go with such a small form factor in such a goddamn large case. Like,
Yeah. I think at
you're
one
going to do
point,
40 liters.
Yeah. I think at one point I figured out I could chuck a quad socket server Opteron board inside the Prodigy / whatever chassis they had. Yeah, it just
Greatest
fit.
mod ever.
Yeah, unfortunately the board died.
No. Oh,
Yeah.
man. You have the worst luck with boards. My goodness.
I know. I abuse them.
It's got to be that New Zealand weather, huh?
Well, it's about 28 degrees ambient in here. That's Celsius, so it's 83 Fahrenheit, and about 95% humidity.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's 1:15 in the
Yeah.
morning.
Is that normal?
It is for this time of year. Though,
My goodness.
every
I
year
am
there is a spate
so
of
sorry.
hardware failures for all of my friends and family because of the humidity and the heat.
Jeez. Do you have like dehumidifiers in your homes to deal with that? Because that's crazy.
They cost too much.
Yeah, I could imagine, but man, that's insane.
Subtropical. Good for testing CPU coolers.
Yes,
Yeah.
very good. Torture test.
Pretty much.
That should be part of our like hardware testing criterion. Just be like, all coolers for all hardware and all thermal performance and reviews must take place in New Zealand in the summertime.
Yep. It could be worse. We could send them to Jordan in Australia in Perth. I think last week he hit 42 Celsius,
Oh, wow.
which is...
That's awful. Yeah, which is tell me Google.
pretty much around 110 Fahrenheit.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Why would humans choose to live anywhere in the world where it can get that warm? Like, that's terrible.
And you get the bugs.
Yes, and the bugs too. I mean, that's just Australia.
Yeah. The whole place wants to kill you. And yet, just a 3-hour flight away in New Zealand, there's nothing poisonous. It's great. Nature is a mysterious beast.
Very mysterious. But you know what else is mysterious? And in fact, this is actually a great thing to transition into just because it sort of has to do with some of the pre-built things we were talking about earlier. And I honestly don't know how to feel about these, so I'd be interested as to how you guys, what you guys sort of think about this form factor. But it seems that sort of AIO's all-in-one desktop solutions really, really exploded at CES this year, which sort of fits into the SFF realm insofar that, like, okay, you're really minimizing, the amount of space that all this stuff is taking up, and, like, what better way to have a small desktop than to eliminate the desktop entirely and just integrate all the components in the monitor. But one that stood out and that actually, John, you wrote a story on was, or I guess it was a few. There was so Origin PC had one called the Omni.
Yep.
There was another one by Main Gear, the Alpha 34. CyberPower had one as well. And I mean, usually when you see all-in-ones like this, it's going to have like mid-range components, oftentimes mobile components, and you'll have like up to maybe 27 inches for the screen, and it's pretty standard fare. But with these, I mean, you're seeing builds with like, Titan computers, multiple SSDs and RAID, highest performance Intel chips. Like, these are some serious stuff, and at least one of these actually has a curved monitor as well, which is impressive insofar that, like, how do you get all this hardware to fit behind a curved monitor and, like, not make it look awful?
Yeah. I think all three that I've featured were curved monitors, which is interesting. Also, the stands are all the same, and the webcams are all the same, so I'm guessing there's an OEM somewhere that decided, well, I brought out a 34-inch widescreen, curved screen, and there you go, do what you want with it. So 3 companies, I think 4 now, 4 companies decided to use it.
Anantech had an article about the Gigabyte was showing off, not really a finalized product, more of a prototype, but but the interesting thing about the Anantech article is that supposedly there is a single company developing these like chassis. It's some company called Loop, though. I mean, we couldn't really find any information about the company or like who they are or if they've developed anything before, but So yeah, there is a single company developing like kind of these bare bones chassis, and everybody's kind of just populating them with parts.
Do we know what company develops the actual panels?
I remember reading it somewhere, but I'm not sure.
Because like from what I hear, it's basically for these curved panels, it's typically either LG or more often Samsung. But I wasn't sure if we knew who made the panels for
It's
these.
probably
particular
LG.
builds.
Samsung kind of likes to keep their nice stuff to themselves.
They just write in
That's true.
TVs.
But yeah, I mean, I find the form factor interesting. I don't know if it's really like on the one hand, I just think the idea of being able to have all this hardware integrated with the monitor and just have like this one neat package, and you're able to eliminate a lot of desk clutter. Not only do you not have the tower, but that means you don't need to have cables connecting the tower to the monitor and all of this. So like in principle, it's sort of like this really nice bundled thing. But I can't imagine this is good for upgradability. I can't imagine this is good from a noise point of view, and I don't know. I feel really, really torn on whether or not I like this idea of like taking these monstrous ultra widescreen monitors and just integrating the components behind them. And yet, like on the other hand, I can't really say that I think it's a bad idea. I think the way they've executed this, like the layout is actually relatively smart, and the cooling solutions are really interesting, and I mean they're able to shove top tier hardware in this. Like if you had told me that someone was able to create an all-in-one that managed to have a Titan in it, I would have laughed at your face. Let alone like a standard off-the-shelf, like no, we're taking the actual card and just using like a ribbon cable, and that's how we integrate it. Like not even like ripping it off and using some sort of custom heatsink solution, and going down to the bare board and all of this, like similar to what we saw with the Vortex. So yeah, I wish I could see one of these in person, but it's really interesting. I would not have thought that this was something that would become a thing.
Yeah, I have a few concerns with it though. Like by integrating it all into the back of the monitor, you're only really removing two cables: the power supply for the monitor and the data cable for the monitor. Everything else is going to be hanging out the bottom of the monitor. So if you've got wired networking, you're going to have that hanging out the bottom. Wired audio, you're going to have that hanging out. And the other issue I've got with them is blower fans.
Yep.
All the blower
like
fans.
I said, from a noise perspective, you're going to want headphones. Like, you should probably have headphones anyway, but...
Yeah, because the design, I imagine the back of the actual monitor is designed for where the blower fans are on the graphics card and the CPU cooler. You're really kind of limited to what kind of graphics cards you put in these things. It has to be a blower style where the fan is in that certain spot.
Yeah. I mean, I again with the other items, like I think from an upgrade standpoint, there isn't really going to be too much here. These proto photos look really nice, but I'm also noticing that none of them show like the assembled enclosure from the back. Like they have like these pictures looking at the back, but they remove the panels so you can see the layout of the components, which is like interesting and handy. But then you're like, okay, but what does it look like when those are covered up and fully assembled? And they don't seem to really want to show you that.
Nope.
And clearly the reason for that is it looks awful. It's just lots of vents everywhere.
Pretty much.
Like it has to be. I mean, I can see at least 4 different locations where they have to have vents. So I think similar to the Vortex, this is definitely something a person with lots of money to burn that doesn't really care can buy, and who isn't particularly interested in sort of upgradability or any of those such things, and just really likes the idea of being able to say, okay, well, instead of having the monitor and the computer similar to like an iMac or any other all-in-one, like I just want it all to be the same thing.
I can see a small amount of upgradability with the motherboard because that's not really dependent on the whole cooling front, as long as it's got whatever matches their all-in-one cooler. And hopefully Intel doesn't change its mounting.
It just uses a ribbon cable to hook it up to the graphics card, which is actually sort of neat. Yeah. I wonder where they source that. And then the other thing that's sort of funny too, and I couldn't actually tell. I was going to ask you guys, but like, so the shot from behind showing the layout of the components has the motherboard recessed pretty deeply into the case, to the point where none of the I/O seems to be exposed. Like any of the I/O that would normally be on the back of an enclosure that you could just plug stuff into. Like, it seems like that lives internally. So I'm wondering, like, are they using like internal extension cables to the external I/O, which you can see towards the left-hand side? Like, there seems to be USB and SD card reader and audio. Or, like, is it uber recessed, but it is exposed and you just can't tell from this promo photo? Like, they don't have anything running along the perimeter of the display or beneath the display that I can see. It's literally just 2 USB ports, audio, and an SD card reader, and that's it. But that can't be it. Like, there's got to be more than that, right?
Unless the cases, and this is the reason why they haven't been showing us the back, is because the case is so thick you can actually easily get to those connectors on the back of the motherboard. I mean, there's no extension on the Flex ATX power supply to plug it in, so I would expect there's a decent amount of thickness in there.
Yeah, that's true. I do wonder how thick it is. And so, were any of these? I take it none of these were actually shown in person, or were there any were there any that were actually on the trade floor at CES? Do we know?
Didn't see any, but I haven't.
Yeah, there were a few, I think. There's a few pictures of them. I'm looking at one right now, and yeah, I mean, it's fairly thick unit, though the perspective makes it kind of hard to tell exactly how thick. But I mean you got I'm not sure because the curved part of it kind of throws it off. But I mean the graphics card's going to be like a little over 40 millimeters thick. So there's at least 40 mil there, plus a little bit of space for kind of airflow to get to it. Then the panel, and then the kind of the frame that it's all kind of attached to. So it's definitely going to be thicker than like an iMac or something, but I don't think it's going to be like too bad. Plus, it's going to be behind the screen, so you're not really going to see it most of the time anyway. But I don't know. It's probably heavy though. I'd be really curious like how heavy one of these things is.
So that seems to wrap up most of the stuff, at least that I found to be interesting with CES. But one of the other things we wanted to talk about today actually doesn't have to do with CES, although it does have to do with SFF and builds and other things. It actually leads into a contest we're going to be running. But for that, I figured I'd let John talk a little bit about that because he sort of spearheaded this.
Yeah, a while ago we reviewed the CryoRig C7. Now this cooler had a bit of interest on the forum because of its design, the fact that it had slots in the side of the fan and whatnot. It's a 92mm low profile cooler, and we're going to be giving it away. Now to enter, we're going to create a thread on the forum that is for posting an image of your setup, so maybe just your computer or your screens and your whole desk and everything. And once you've posted in that, private message me the link to your post, and by doing that you've entered. Now this contest will end on the 31st of January, and the winner will be drawn at random the next day. We'll cover all the shipping, but we can't be responsible for customs charges. Sorry.
Sorry, people in Europe.
Pretty much. We're pretty lenient here in New Zealand, but I don't know about other countries, so we kind of have that limitation.
Yeah, and overall, it seemed to be a pretty good cooler. I like the review that you wrote up about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting design. I couldn't see any benefits to the slots, apart from when it's very close to a panel.
Oh, John, for people who aren't familiar with it, what's your username on the forum?
Forgot to mention that. I am Confusus.
And you'll notice for any of us and a few other people in the forum itself, if there's a red banner that indicates that we're site staff, that's how you know we're legit. So. That thread will go. Yeah, at least we think we're legit. So that thread will go live shortly after this podcast is published. So just be on the lookout for that. And yeah, definitely take some photos and feel free to enter.
It'll be interesting to see what everyone's got. Everyone's running. See how many of us are actually running small form factor.
Well, I would argue that I am. However, it's also a laptop. Literally take pictures of my MacBook and be like, here.
That's
I
kind of
spent
cheating.
so much time assembling this. It's only 1.5 liters.
I suppose it qualifies as an all-in-one.
Yeah, that's right. It is a portable, battery-powered, ultra-compact all-in-one.
There you go.
And like half of the volume is attributable not to components, but just to batteries.
Sounds like most phones.
That's right. Yeah, well, phones, it's more like 2/3 at this point. My goodness. You crack open like a iPhone or a flagship Android phone, and it's just like battery, and then a tiny wee little bitty board that has like literally everything shoved on both sides.
Assuming you can crack it open is the problem.
Yeah, it's only getting harder, isn't it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I can pull the back off mine, no problem.
Says the person who owns a Windows phone.
I do. I love it.
You are alone.
Also,
I joke. I'm mean about it, but I like Windows Phone for what it is. I would never use it personally, but I'm happy it exists.
That's better than the Fisher Price My First phone from Apple, and the god awful mess that is the Android ecosystem. I mean, you buy an Android phone, are you guaranteed to get it updated?
I mean, if
Nope.
it's a Nexus, maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know about anything else, but. And now you know why I don't own an Android phone.
Yeah. I mean,
Anyway.
my phone went from Windows 8 to Windows 8.1 to Windows 10.
Yeah, and what is your phone? I forget the actual model.
I have a Nokia Lumia 830,
Good choice. Good choice.
which then got rebranded to Microsoft about a week after I bought it.
That is correct. I had always wondered what Microsoft was going to do after buying the company, which seemed like a really unusual thing for them to do anyway. And it was just
Well, it was the only manufacturer. It was the only manufacturer really doing Windows phones. They thought they'd bring it all in-house like Apple.
Yeah, pretty much. I guess that was the motivation,
Yeah.
and we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah.
The hardware's been.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they killed the one product I wanted.
Which one?
Nokia was building a proper smartwatch
Oh, really?
based on Windows, the Windows Phone ecosystem, and it was really cool. It had 4 icons on it. It was really cool design. And then Microsoft killed it and came out with this band with like 3 icons on it, and it was all skinny and Fitbit style.
Yeah, it's really more of a fitness band smartwatch than a smartwatch that also has fitness features. I don't really know anyone that owns it. I don't know, when reviews came out for it seemed pretty good, but like I don't know that commercially it's been terribly successful.
No, because you're kind of limited to until Windows 10 comes out, you're kind of limited to the ecosystem, the Microsoft one. However, with Windows 10, it's it can work with other systems.
I knew what you meant.
It's 1:30 in the morning.
It's fine. Well, look, before we turn this show into a show about like mobile, I figure we can end the show by changing the subject completely to something that also has nothing to do with small form factor, but is at least doubly as hilarious, which was an article that you, John, wrote on January 8th. Lee and Lee is indeed on a boat.
Yes.
Easily the greatest ever conceived chassis for a computer that I've ever seen with my eyes. It is beautiful. It is everything. It is glorious. And it is a strange departure from the other unusual enclosure Lee and Lee made of yesteryear, which was not only styled to look like a train, but I believe you could actually buy tracks for it and actually power the thing and it would run.
Yes, you could. At one point, I was actually thinking of buying that and powering it via 12 volts on the rails, so I could roll around like along the wall and be powered by Pico PSU. Just wireless, just a wireless NAS, just rolling around my room.
So for people who are listening, there's really no other way. I'll put a link in the show notes, but you really should just take a look at this absolute monstrosity that is literally an ITX case that's made to look like a boat. I mean, I can't explain it. There's no way to put how this looks to words. It just is, and so are we. So you should go and take a look at it. but like it's like multiple tiers. It's like a little cruise ship. It's got like the wheel on the top, and they even did like LED lighting that also looks just as terrible as the rest of the case. So like if you're worried that this is, I really want a computer enclosure that looks like a boat, but I don't think it's going to be gaudy enough, don't you worry. They've got you covered.
Pretty much. Yeah, I mean, the engineering side of it's actually quite impressive. The cutouts that they've managed to do and the forming that they've managed to do on the hull and all of that is quite impressive. So maybe it's just more of a technology showcase rather than a actual product. But I found it rather fitting that the fan they used on the CPU cooler was a god-awful colour to match the rest of the design.
Yeah, it's like it's not even like a knock to a like cream and coffee like brown, but interesting brown. Like it literally looks like mud and swamp water brown. Like it looks awful.
That about covers the colour, yeah.
Yeah, and then they went with like an Asus card with like a decent enough looking shroud with like chrome heat pipes and some nice red racing stripes that just doesn't at all match anything else. And
a mechanical hard drive, mechanical 2.5 inch drive. With a whole lot of writing all over it. It's like great way to show off your case there, isn't it?
Oh man, yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, but what's curious to me is that like the orientation of the components is sort of interesting, right? So you have the motherboard on top, and then they use what seems like a pretty long ribbon cable for the graphics card, and then the graphics card itself is literally lying parallel and tucked beneath the motherboard. The motherboard sort of sits on its own tray, so it's sort of thermally isolated. And then it's sort of, all of the components kind of fan out from the back towards the front in these tiers. So the next tier would be the 2.5 inch drive, and then below that is the 3.5 inch one. So like, I mean, I don't know if this is a practical layout, but if you like turn around to the back, like, yeah, indeed, you have easy access to all the ports and whatnot, and you can actually see in one of the shots where they put the power supply. Of course, A, it looks ridiculous, and B, I believe this thing is something like 40 liters or so in volume, and even though it only supports
it's
ITX,
impossible to calculate because of the design. I mean, there's no way to calculate actual volume of this thing.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that like half of the height of the thing is like the hull of the boat, and yet basically nothing is actually stored in the hull except for like the power supply. So you have like all this space, like at least a third, if not a half of the entire enclosure, and it's just empty. Like it's not being used at all.
Yeah, the proportions are way off as well. I work right next to the port in my home city, and I've never seen a super yacht or any kind of yacht with proportions like that. It just looks like it'd tip over.
It looks ridiculous.
No.
It does.
I hope not, though. I really hope a modder makes like it actually float and propel itself.
Yeah.
Like, somebody needs to buy this and make that happen.
A couple of laptop batteries
it
inside
needs to
it.
happen. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you have the space in the hull to fit batteries, right? Stick with little power components, and then find a way to seal everything up.
Chuck a couple of big hard drives in it.
You thought the computer that was on a train was impractical. This is Lian Li just one-upping itself,
Pretty much. But it seems to be something that they've got a trend in doing, so I wonder what they're going to do in a couple of years' time. Like they've done
a rocket ship.
They've done a boat.
They've done a train, plane, or no, they've done a train and a boat. So they need to do a plane next.
Yep, and then a car.
Ooh, a plane, and then a car.
A plane would be interesting. Or you just get a couple of those MSI vortexes and put them end to end. There's your fuselage.
Act as the turbines. Oh, that's great.
Oh, that'll work. One on each side. Get a couple of Mac Pros for where the passengers sit.
But as much as we joke about this, Lian Li, I'm not a big fan of most of their designs. Their manufacturing is pretty good, and their choice of materials is excellent. But on the one hand, I sort of laugh and say, like, how stupid to waste all your time and money paying someone to actually make this stupid thing. But on the other hand, it's sort of like endearing that they actually feel like they should, or they're like, you know what, like, we're the sort of company that is totally down for making something that's completely woefully impractical and stupid and ridiculous but also kind of like fun to look at. And let's just do it. And then they do it, like, to their credit. Like, here it is. It's a case that's a boat. Like, it's just like you kind of want to stop looking at it, but you can't. Like, you can't stop looking at it because it's just so weird.
Yeah, it's not something would normally feature on the website because of its size, but we had to.
Oh, we had to. I mean, you know, you can't not talk about it. And maybe that's like the brilliance. Maybe that's why it's successful. Maybe
It's
that's
all
why they
marketing.
do it.
It's like a train. It's all marketing.
They've guaranteed that every single tech website worth its salt will talk about this. We'll talk about Manly because you can't not. The moment you see it, you've got to like make fun of it. So.